Hi, how's it going? I'm Ella Feingold. I'm an orchestrator. I hope you guys are doing really well today. I wanted to make a video about interpreting MIDI from composers. I would say typically our job is to be quite literal when we get MIDI, because clearly that's what the composer wrote, so why would you do anything other than what you've been given? But I want to show a couple of cases that have come up a couple of times for me where it borders being literal and being a little bit more inventive. And, you know, as a disclaimer, I'm sure some of you might go, you know, well, I would never do that, or why did they do that? But they did that because I've seen this stuff, you know. So these things do happen. So I just want to talk first of all about composers and orchestrators for a second, and the tools before we get started on this example. So when you're composing and you're working in a DAW, you are at the mercy of your sample libraries. So if you're doing, you know, a complicated string texture or something, that means you're loading up a ton of articulations and doing a lot of stuff to create a sound. And what I find most of the time is that there just isn't enough time to do that kind of sculpting with MIDI, and that a lot of it is painting with more general colors. And for example, with aleatory, meaning music left to chance, there's sort of two ways to do it. I mean, one is to play really crazy, you know, thick, tense voicings and clusters and whatnot. And another way is using aleatoric libraries like Spitfire's, I think it's Albion 4. And there's, of course, other ones out there. I think there's an 8Dio library with Christopher Young gestures and stuff like that. So those are, you know, pre-recorded aleatoric gestures. But some composers don't have access to that financially, and so they're, you know, playing clusters on the keyboard. So let's talk about an orchestrator now. So for us, we have to decide, is this literal? Do they literally mean every single one of these notes, every single one of these pitches that's being played on the MIDI keyboard? And are we being literal and transferring that to the orchestra? Or do they just mean something that's tense and we can be a little more imaginative? And so composers are incredibly, incredibly busy, and I never bug them unless I absolutely have to. But sometimes when things might be a little bit unclear, that's when I'll send an email and, you know, just ask. And the reason I ask is because these kinds of things that I'm about to show have come up for me before, but also I've been contacted by composers ahead of time, and they've said things like, hey, this is supposed to be really eerie, you know, really jarring, but I didn't have time to flush it out, and I didn't have the sample libraries to do that, so can you sort of make more of a moment out of this? So that's just a little bit of a backstory. So I want to come here at the beginning. So this is something I get a lot, where it's just, you know, like a minor second or maybe 3 minor seconds stacked up, and I have to interpret, am I being literal here, or do they, like I said before, or do they just want something that can be menacing or, you know, rough and coarse, and to add more pitches to it or whatever. So if I were to be quite literal with this, then I would do something like non-divisi here, and I would just do what we call SAT being it, you know, just basically just splitting it out top to bottom. And there's nothing really exciting about this, but if that's what needs to happen musically to convey whatever's happening in the scene or, you know, in the video game, then that's what they do, or that's what we do rather, and it's quite literal. So there's nothing fancy about this. I mean, you know, you could orchestrate this out a couple of different ways, but I'm showing you this not to show the orchestration, but more so just being more literal. So let me show you a couple of other ways that I've done stuff like this, and what's worked. And so here is the same exact MIDI, and this is more of a quiet approach to the same kind of moment, in a, you know, in a pianissimo sort of texture. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking C sharp and D, and I'm trying to think of a lot of different things I can do with C sharp and D, with different articulations and different colors. So if we were to go top down, I'm being quite literal here. I could have, you know, done the non-Divisi thing again, where they're, you know, stopping the C sharp on their G string, and they've just got the open D oscillating. And if I wanted to make that even more of a moment, I could have them sort of oscillate back and forth while the D string is open. But I'm choosing to make this a little more of a subtle kind of tense moment. So in the second violins, I'm, you know, saying vary speed and articulation. So this could be going from, you know, spiccato to legato and whatnot. And so they're just, you know, oscillating the pitches. In the violi, I'm having them do a quarter tone trill, so they're, you know, in between the pitches. In the celli, I'm asking them to do sul pont and glissing in quarter tones. So, you know, these two things are much more tonal, but in the middle here, this gets more jarring and more unsettling. And then with the contrabasses, I'm having them do natural harmonics that are sounding at these pitches. So here, this is, you know, more of a literal frenzied kind of moment. And here, this is a more just subtle, but, you know, tense, quiet kind of moment. So I would say that we're kind of progressing from something that's incredibly literal to a little bit more interpretive or whatever. You know, a mentor of mine once said something to me which is just so profound, and it's really true, that he said, you know, a lot of times in orchestration, when we're working for other composers, that it's like guessing someone's favorite color. And this is like guessing someone's favorite color. Sometimes they quite mean C sharp and D and do it and move on. But sometimes it's not that, and it's, no, I needed more here, but I didn't have that library. So I just wanted something, you know, just more menacing, or I wanted something subtle and quiet, but a little bit unsettling and still having some undulation. So that's, you know, more what this would be. So we're going from quite literal to a little bit less. And here are a couple of other approaches. So this gets into more aleatory, but I've had a composer ask for something like this, you know, where they do want just a little more, it's like a higher thread count, you know, in sheets, more little intricacies while still maintaining the pitch that they used. So this is not that. This is more, you know, sort of Penderecki notation. And so sometimes it's not C sharp D, but, you know, all the pitches from whatever, C sharp up to a sixth, or, you know, using microtones and whatnot. So this type of thing I've done before, where, you know, I would say cluster within a given range, and sometimes I would mark it non-vibrato and dead tone. And so, you know, this is open to interpretation. But this gives you This is more of an imaginative moment, and this is less literal and certainly a lot more tense. And to finish the examples off, things I've also done, things like this, where I'm using aleatory and they're sort of, creating vertigo. It was a term that I stole from John Williams in a lot of his scores, where he'll write these kinds of things with aleatoric gestures and whatnot. And works out really well, and I've done this before. And so I'm showing you all these examples because as orchestrators, it's our job to do what the composer needs. And sometimes it ain't that, baby. It ain't being literal with C# and D. Sometimes it's, I need more from you as an orchestrator, but I don't have the libraries, or I don't have, I don't have the libraries to pull that off, or I don't have the time to sit here and, call up a tremolo patch and then call up a spiccato patch and do two of them and perform these backwards. And then I don't have a quarter tone trill patch in my sample library, and I don't have anything that does this, and I don't have natural bass harmonics. So, that's why we can come to the rescue. But as I say in other videos, be literal first, and if you're doubting it, ask questions, because these kinds of things have worked out really well. When I've said, "Do you want this literally here? What are you looking for?" Another just little side note with aleatory is sometimes what I'll do, and my orchestration partner loves doing this, which is just putting in the rhythm slashes. Sometimes I leave it out because I want the moment to be a little less strict and kind of losing themselves in the gesture. But oftentimes, I might mark out, all of the beats in the measure. So that's that. Now I want to talk about another thing that I've gotten over the years. And I've done this a couple of different ways, and again, it's interpretation and guessing people's favorite colors. So if I were to look at this here, I would say that this is tonal, and obviously the harmony is, it's tense for two reasons. I mean, one, just because of this low interval here, and just because of the crunchiness inside the pitch, inside of the chord. And so I would be scratching my head going, is this more of like a Stravinsky Le Sacre du Printemps kind of, very literal kind of thing? Or is this supposed to be, clusters or whatever? So if this were more of a Stravinsky thing, what I would do here is actually orchestrate this out using double stops. I would most likely add this F an octave below in the basses. And I would carefully, divide whoever to get comfortable double stops, to force them into more of a ruvido, rough kind of color. So, that's what you could do here. And this is one way to do these type of gestures when you've got a lot of low crunchy stuff. Especially if it's forte or fortissimo. If it's pianissimo, no, I'm just going to divide it down. But when it's forte and above, I don't want to lose players by dividing them, because dividing the strings is a natural way of reducing the dynamic. So I want to find as many comfortable, double stops as I possibly can to just get the most out of the gesture. So I've gotten things like this, where I've orchestrated this out and, thinking like, cool, I've gotten all the pitches and it's going to be even more rough and coarse, and yes. And then I've gotten to the scoring stage only to find out that what they actually wanted was something more aleatoric. And so that's why sometimes you have to ask questions. So the way I would solve this problem, sort of either on the spot or by doing this aleatoric ahead of time, is doing something more like this, where I'm taking the pitches, saying cluster within a given range, and to change the pitch each time, within these notes. So it's constantly evolving. You could also ask for grab any comfortable double stop, within this given range. That's another option, and there's nothing for the violins to do because these pitches aren't available on the violin. So you could ask them to just do some pitchless bowing, where they're just dampening the strings with their left hand and at the frog, and really just, adding some grit on top of that. So that's what I wanted to talk about for this video. Again, you might be going, well, I would never do that. That composer's lazy. And I don't think, these particular composers would be lazy. I mean, they don't have the library to do it, or they ain't going to sit there for, 2 hours and, craft this page out with all of these subtleties. So you're here to help as an orchestrator. If you don't like helping people, you're in the wrong business. You're here to help and to make the music sound like them. So yeah, I just wanted to show a couple of things where they've been right on the border of, literal and aleatory, or literal and a little more tonally refined. So I hope this is helpful. And stay weird, be kind, remember to love yourself and each other. So I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much. Okay.